Good afternoon. I'm Teresa Stretch, an education and training specialist with the Institute of Child Nutrition, and I would like to welcome you to the October School of Nutrition STAR webinar on key performance indicators for school of nutrition success. In order to meet the unique training, technical assistance, and professional development needs of school of nutrition professionals, ICN has launched the STAR Nutrition Strategies, Trainings, Action Plans, and Resources initiative to help develop goals and best practices to improve program administrations and operations. The School of Nutrition STAR program will offer a multitude of elements that include face-to-face workshops, virtual instructor-led trainings, webinars, and spotlight success stories to proactively offer standardized training, real-life strategies of program implementation, mentorship, and coaching to develop action plans and goals, along with training and facilitation techniques and access to free resources and education materials to assist school and nutrition professionals with navigating through the enhanced responsibilities of school and nutrition operations. The Institute of Child Nutrition has collaborated with USDA to host monthly webinars. The STAR webinar series is designed as a communication platform that features districts that have implemented creative strategies and best practices for common school and nutrition topics, as well as allied organizations who develop and offer free resources to support school and nutrition programs. The Institute of Child has created a website for all materials and resources specifically related to the webinars. You can find the information at theicn.org/STAR. Thank you for joining today's webinar, Key Performance Indicators for School and Nutrition Success. Key performance indicators are measures of performance that focus on the most critical aspects of programs' performance. They provide a rigorous, number-oriented approach to target specific areas of emphasis and assess results in an objective manner. They allow users to identify standards for comparisons, identify problem areas, and measure progress in correcting these problems. KPIs can be used to identify where resources should be invested to have the most positive impact, such as equipment or labor. They can be used to track the progress of major initiatives such as breakfast in the classroom, salad bars, farm to school, participation, costs, and revenue. This webinar will provide an overview of key performance indicators. It will discuss strategies of utilizing the ICN research-based key performance indicators and demonstrate the functionality of some of the financial KPIs Excel spreadsheets. During today's webinar, all attendees are muted. There will be time for questions following the speaker's presentation. If you have a question, please type it in the question box on your screen. Handouts are available and can be downloaded directly from your webinar panel. We will try to get to as many questions as possible, but due to our time constraints, every question may not be answered during the webinar. At the end of the presentation, you will be asked to complete an evaluation, and after completion of the evaluation, you will receive a certificate. Professional standards for school and nutrition professionals is a key provision of the Healthy Hunger Free Act of 2010. The topics covered in today's webinar fall under the key area administrations and meet the USDA Professional Standards Code Inventory Management 3340. Our panelist today is Sandy Kerwood. Sandy is the Director of School and Nutrition Programs for the Virginia Department of Education. She was a former School of Food Service Director for 15 years in California school districts, successful in implementing various programs. She has been a registered dietitian and worked in a variety of food service and healthcare settings. She has a BS in Food and Nutrition, Master's in Business Healthcare Administration, and a PhD from Iowa State in Hospitality Management with a focus on food safety and farm-to-school programs. The learning objective for today's webinar is participants will identify strategies and tools that can assist in making informed financial decisions. Sandy will begin by sharing some general information about the importance of identifying and applying standards for key performance indicators. She will also discuss the functionalities of the ICN Excel spreadsheet. Sandy?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity, Teresa, to share some information and background on key performance indicators. We call them KPIs for short. And today, as Teresa mentioned, we'll be going over some ways to use the information as well as the interactive spreadsheets that have been developed by the Institute. Key performance indicators are important because in order to manage, we have to be able to measure. KPIs are wonderful tools that we can use to evaluate our performance against a standard or over a period of time. And performance measurement is conducted in units. Data is units that we look at in order to compare, such as meals, money, or such as meals or money. And these standards include industry standards as well as benchmarking. So for example, one industry standard would be meals per labor hour. And there is an industry standard that says if you have a school that is preparing their meals, you can measure that school against another school. Or if you are using a satellite system, there's a standard for how many meals would be produced using that type of labor versus a central kitchen. So these are all ways in which an industry standard can be used to compare your outcomes to the industry. Benchmarking is also used to determine an acceptable standard and comparing those results and data. Time periods are also used for comparisons. For example, you can use month-to-month data or year-to-year data for one site or across multiple sites within your school district. Why use KPIs? KPIs can help you determine how you're performing. It can provide an internal look into your organization and your performance over time or from unit to unit. You can use these standards to gauge where you want to be from where you are now. It also gives you an opportunity to identify those opportunities for growth and improvement, and also to quantify any progress that you're making towards your goals. KPIs are used to measure a number of things. We break those into three main categories. Meal counts and participation. An example would be average daily participation. For financial and inventory management, such as revenue per meal equivalent, and productivity and labor, such as meals per labor hour. The Institute of Child Nutrition has developed a resource manual that outlines these three categories, and there are KPIs in each of those three categories for a total of 12 measures. You can see them listed on the under each category here. Calculating KPIs are used to assess not only your efficacy but your efficiency of your programs. You can use such things as forecasting your food purchasing or labor requirements, looking at discrepancies or errors in your accounting system, and using that data to look at financial viability of any new initiatives that you're considering. KPIs have a lot of value. We can use these for benchmarking, trend analysis, developing department action plans, and also communicating with your key stakeholders. Benchmarking is comparing the performance of similar operations or that unit's performance against other units, such as from school to school or over time from one year to the other or from month to month. There are two main types for school nutrition programs and benchmarking. Internal, as we discussed, is looking internally within your program or using industry standard to see how you are compared to other programs like yours. Trend analysis allows us to Look at school nutrition programs, comparing that data over periods of time. This also provides you a foundation for future forecasting, and you can use this data to interpret changes in those results. This data can be then used to develop action plans. Looking at that data over a period of time helps you to not only prioritize your issues, to develop SMART goals for improvement, but also looking at how you can allocate resources. Where do you want to put your staff? Where do you want to allocate your efforts in order to improve a specific portion of your program? And then helps you to measure that progress. This also is a valuable tool for communicating with stakeholders. You can use this in supporting your management decisions. If you're looking at staffing from one building to the next, if you're looking at meals per labor hour, how many staff members, how many labor hours do you need in that unit to produce that number of meals? If you're looking at menu items, how many of that item do you sell or serve? Does it make sense to put that menu item on more frequently? These are some of the decisions that the key performance indicators can help you evaluate. This can also be included in employee evaluations. So for example, if you're creating a measurement that is part of your employee evaluation, your employees know what they need to achieve to become efficient in their own position. It can also help you in proposing solutions, such as alternative breakfast implementation. Would this result in enough participation to warrant adding another program? Also, another factor is absenteeism. Looking at that data might help you identify where employees, if they're being absent over a period of time, what is that rate and what actions might you take in order to remedy that situation. Presentations can be developed using your key performance indicator data. These can be portrayed graphically, visually in a PowerPoint, pictorially. This can be done internally. It's a great tool for working with your staff to show them where you are with your strategic plan, how far you've come from implementing one program from year to year, helping onboard new staff. What does your program look like and what things are measured as part of your program? We talked about using that as an evaluation tool, and certainly it's very applicable in training. Externally from your department, this data can be integrated into school board presentations. It can be used for informations and conveying information to your principals, your parent groups, as well as community presentations. At the end, after we look at the interactive spreadsheets, the next opportunity that ICN will be developing from this work is the ability to export that data straight into a graphic presentation. We're all looking very forward to that opportunity. Now we're going to go into a polling question. And you'll be given the opportunity to select one of these 4 answers. What KPI would you use to evaluate productivity? The 4 choices are meal equivalents, average daily participation, meals per labor hour, and inventory turnover. We'll give you about 60 seconds to make your selection. Then we'll discuss the outcome. Okay, let's see the results. So 7% of you felt that meal equivalents was the best answer. 25% said average daily participation, 63% said meals per labor hour, and 5% said inventory turnover. So 63% of you were correct. And the correct answer is meals per labor hour. So meals per labor hour measures staff productivity by assessing the number of meal equivalents per hour of staff worked. You can find more information on the specifics of the KPIs in your resource manual. Okay, now let's take a look at your handout. Listed as a handout is the KPI Interactive Spreadsheet. This is also available at the ICN webpage as listed on your screen. So one thing to remember when you're looking at using the spreadsheets, it's a good idea to double check the figures with a calculator. While these spreadsheets have been tested and used extensively, it's a good idea just to double check because these spreadsheets can be unlocked and there's always room for human error. So let's take a look, before we go to questions, let's take a look at the Essential KPI Interactive Spreadsheet. Okay, here you see what would be on the content page of the interactive spreadsheets. It lists the KPIs that are available using the interactive spreadsheets. So if you've pulled your handout up, you'll be able to download this to your hard drive, or you can go to the website and open the spreadsheet from there. So the spreadsheet can be calculated for each school and allows you to obtain a better idea of how your school is performing. For the big picture, you can also complete them for your district if you need to present the information to your superintendent and school board. So you can use these spreadsheets, like I said, for each school, or one for each school and for your entire district, or one that encompasses your entire district. At the bottom of the spreadsheet, the very first tab is called Content. That's what we're looking at now. And if you move across, the third tab is Meal Equivalents. The meal equivalents, look at the school year. It adds a place for you to add your school year at the top of the page. This data transfers over from the table of contents. So one of the wonderful things about using these interactive spreadsheets is the data that you place in one spreadsheet carries over from spreadsheet to spreadsheet so that you do not need to continue to add that data. This also facilitates you using the data without introducing the risk of an error by inputting the same data in multiple places. So on screen 3, which is your meal equivalent page, take a look on the sheet where you can enter your meal counts, as well as the dollar amount from your non-program food sales. As you enter your data, the meal equivalent is calculated and entered into the corresponding month on the bottom of the chart and carried over to your year-to-date totals. You'll notice at the far right of your screen, the current year's free lunch reimbursement rate and the USDA food value rate is listed. These values can be updated from year to year and will be updated in the original spreadsheet on the Institute's webpage when those rates change annually. The links where these data are located are also listed at the bottom of your spreadsheet. In the conversion factors chart on the conversion factor list, these are used on your spreadsheet. Some states do not use these conversions. Some states may have different variations that they use, but these are the ones that the Institute has found to be the most prevalent. The breakfast and snack sales have been left unprotected, so if you don't use those numbers, you can modify that for your state or for your district. In screen 4, where it says ADP, that is your average daily participation. On this screen, you'll enter your data. The average daily participation for the month and the average daily participation rate is set up to be calculated based using your data. In screen 5, this is your revenue statement of activities report to list your revenues and expenditures. The information for this sheet may come from either your school nutrition program office or your business office. You enter your data into each of these cells, and the spreadsheet will calculate the columns and a net excess or deficit comparing your revenues to your expenditures. The sixth tab is called your revenue per meal equivalent, or your MEQs. We call it your meal equivalents for short. In this area, you do not have to enter your data because the information from your statement of activity sheet automatically flows and calculates these percentages for you. This is a very useful tool in looking at how much effort you're putting into each one of those categories and the resultant dollars per each meal equivalent that you've earned. The seventh tab is your cost as a percentage of revenue. Again, you do not need to add any data here or conduct any calculations. This sheet will automatically feed from the other worksheets, and the information flows from worksheet to worksheet. As you notice, the little green house here in the middle of the screen is also, if you need to go back, that takes you back to the content page, the table of contents, if you need to go back and look for any additional missing information. Down at the bottom now, you'll see the little plus sign on your spreadsheet, and that gives you the option to get to the next category, and this is the break-even point. This is a very useful tool for calculating, particularly at the end of your school year. Again, you do not need to enter the data here. This information flows from the previous data set, and it gives you the opportunity to determine at what point does your revenue exceed your expenditures and how you're doing for your overall year. The next spreadsheet as you move along is your inventory turnover rate. This is a great tool to be used if you're looking at how often does your inventory turn over, because money sitting in your storeroom is money that you've spent that you're not getting any return on. So managing your inventory turnover rate can be a very useful tool for your site level managers. This spreadsheet helps you measure how your school district is managing your inventory turnover. Enter the beginning inventory amount on this document and enter the amount of food purchased during the month. Next, enter the amount of the ending inventory. This will give you the cost of goods sold or food used. With this information, the spreadsheet will calculate the number of times that your inventory has turned over. Industry standard is about 2 or 2.5 turnovers per menu cycle. The next screen is your meals per labor hour. And meals per labor hour is a very effective key performance indicator. You can begin by filling out table 1. As you can see, the number of serving days is already there from your ADP because you've entered this information on a prior sheet. In the top table, you're going to enter the number of staff that worked during the month and the total number of hours that each staff worked. This will allow the spreadsheet to calculate your meals per labor hour. Below, in Table 2, you can determine how many labor hours per day you will need to reach a desired meals per labor hour. As you can see, at the bottom, there are some industry standards as a reference to show you conventional system versus convenience system in terms of what would be an industry standard for how many meals per labor hour. And you can use this to benchmark your labor hours compared to the industry standard. The next tab over is your staff turnover rate. We're always concerned with how frequently our staff turns over, sometimes due to voluntary or involuntary turnover. This spreadsheet allows the school nutrition program director, or even at the manager level, to determine how often a position may need to be filled. We all know that managing our staff and managing labor turnover is very important because wonderful employees are tough to come by sometimes. So here you would enter the number of employees that were terminated during the period, the number of employees at the beginning of the period, and the number of employees at the end of the period. This spreadsheet is then set up to calculate the percentage of the staff turnover rate. And as we mentioned, another important KPI is absenteeism. And you can measure absenteeism from month to month to identify if there are certain months when absenteeism is a bigger concern than other months, or over a year from year to year. The absenteeism rate spreadsheet can be set up for an individual, someone that's been out for more times than you would like. And it can also be set up by school to compare school to school or as your district as a whole. You would enter the number of hours that are a loss due to absences and the total number of hours planned into Table 1. The absenteeism rate will be calculated and entered in the chart above. So as you can see, these key performance indicators, by using the reference tool that Teresa referred to, that is also available on the ICM website, and these key performance indicator interactive spreadsheets are very useful tools to help you manage your program. So what we will do now is there's just a couple more slides that I wanted to show you. And again, here is the website for finding the KPIs as well as the resource tool. And now let's go to questions. So one question I have for you is, what is the next step with the Key Performance Indicator interactive spreadsheets that the Institute of Child Nutrition will be preparing for you? And the answer is, that will be the next step. Will be developing the ability to pull that data directly into charts and graphs and presentations that then you can use, as we described, either internally with your staff for training or evaluations, as well as externally with your school board, your superintendent, possibly principals, or even your community. So let's take a minute and see if there are some other questions coming in. So here's a question. What are we using for standards? So the standard references as listed in the resource guide from the Institute of Child Nutrition are those standards that have been researched not only by the Institute of Child Nutrition, but in other resource material and documented from the industry based on current research and references. So there are a few resource reference books, and those are listed in the reference under the resources in the Institute materials. So if you haven't had a chance to look at the resource manual, the Institute also has those available to send to you. In Virginia, we shared those with each of our school nutrition program directors because they're a great resource. They not only talk about how to use the interactive spreadsheet, but they also give you a case study to work through and list the references there as well. As someone said, I believe it's called Child Nutrition Programs in the 21st Century is a great resource, and there are a lot of references listed in that document as well. So let me pull up these questions for y'all. Another question is, does the sheet track or account for overtime? And so if you want, so on the meals per labor hour, if you want to add overtime, you want to include any time that's been allocated toward the preparation of that meal. So if you've added overtime into your meal, you probably want to document that because you want to include how you arrived at those meals per labor hour. Because if you have a person that's scheduled for 6 hours and you count that towards your meals per labor hour, but that person ends up working additional hours, you're going to definitely want to include that because that time needs to be accounted for, because clearly more hours means your meals per labor hour calculation would not be accurate because you would be actually using more time for the same amount of meals, therefore your meals per labor hour would go down. Another question is, should we enter per school or per district? And that really depends on how you're going to use the data. Clearly, I believe meals per labor hour is very useful for school to school. So looking at that school from month to month or over from year to year, and then capturing each of your schools and getting a district value is important information that you convey to your school board. So it really depends on how you're going to be using that data. If you're using it for training and evaluation of your program, from school to school is very important. If you're using that to measure the overall program status, you might want to use your entire district and do that from year to year. Another question is, what is the industry average for meals per labor hour? And if you look at the meals per labor hour interactive spreadsheet, there's a chart there that compares convenience and non-convenience production, and you can use that as a guideline or an industry standard to compare to. Someone else asked for the ICN website page again, so let me pull that up for you. And if you just Google the Institute of Child Nutrition, you will be able to find the website. They list resources from A to Z. If you pull up the A to Z resource, you can just select K for KPI, and that brings up both the resource and the interactive spreadsheets. So it's pretty easy to find, which is very, very helpful. And another question, which is similar to the former question, what resources can we cite when using meals per labor hour? And again, those references are listed in the resource manual, Institute of Child Nutrition's resource manual. Here's a question again about meals per labor hour. And how would you calculate meals per labor hour for a district that uses a central kitchen? One way that you would do that is capturing all the hours for all the satellite sites. And you can do it a couple of ways. You could calculate or add all the hours at the central kitchen and then all the meals that are produced that are leaving the kitchen. Or if you're satelliting those meals and you want to get an overall total, you can take the additional hours that are used to serve the meals at the satellite site and include those in your central kitchen hours. And then if there's any additional meals that are served at that site, you'd want to include those also. So basically, you want to capture any hours that are used to produce those meals, whether at the central site or at the satellite site, or if you're just trying to benchmark your central kitchen, maybe compared to a production kitchen, you could do that. But generally, you want to look at your central kitchen over time in your meals per labor hour, because you may then want to use that data to determine if you want to move a staff member from the central kitchen to a satellite site or to a production kitchen or vice versa. And that can help you make some of those decisions. One of the comments is, it seems that the meals per labor hour for prep schools is quite low. That is the industry standard, but I know for many folks, upwards of 20 would not be unusual. It also has to do with how much preparation you're doing. So you can use the industry standard, or you can use your own internal standards. You can compare a very productive kitchen to a kitchen that is maybe a little less productive or less seasoned staff, and compare those kitchens one to another, or you can look at your overall operation from year to year. One other question, is there a training presentation to use with school level management? Actually, this presentation would be available that you could work with your school level management. It will be available on the Institute's website. You can also go through the interactive spreadsheets with your team and use some practice data or use the case studies from the resource manual along with the interactive spreadsheets to give your team some experience with practicing with those. These references are available to all states. This is the Institute of Child Nutrition's materials, and I was able to order those for Virginia from the Institute. They were able to ship them out to us for each of our school nutrition program directors, and it was a very valuable tool. And we've gone over those at state meetings to make it easier for the directors to use those materials. So they're very interactive. They're very great resource. Another question, on the key performance indicators, a la carte sales seem as the non-program food sales. And yes, you could incorporate both of those into non-program food sales. I think they're using those interchangeably definition. So here's a question that you will have to do the calculation for yourself. How many people would you recommend for 650 lunches? So if you put that information, you can use the meals per labor hour spreadsheet backwards by putting in the number of lunches and what you want as your meals per labor hour, and that would then calculate the number of hours that you would need. So another question about the meals per labor hour, do you include the break times in the labor hours? For instance, if a staff is scheduled for 8 hours but has a half an hour break, do you use 7.5 hours? You would use however much time you are paying for. If the person is paid for 8 hours, you probably want to include that if you're looking at it from a dollar value. But if you're looking for the actual productivity time, then you would only use the 7.5. And one more question. What is the difference between convenience and non-convenience when calculating meals per labor hour? So convenience would be more your satellite sites, and non-convenience would be a prep site. One more question. How would you use this information for modeling a new supper program? So again, you might want to refer to a meal equivalent for your supper, or you could look at an industry standard or benchmark compared to another district that might be using a similar model to your own. There's a number of models for supper. Some people are using a super snack where it is something that they prepackage and send out, while some divisions are actually doing a sit down and serve supper. So you'd want to look definitely at your preparation model in determining how many labor hours that you would want to include for your meal equivalent. Another question, is there a resource for determining what the standard meal equivalent is based upon? And really that's independent on your district and how you determine what meal equivalent you want to use. I think the Institute of Child Nutrition and the Virginia Department of Education uses the Institute's model. It's a little easier to benchmark if you're using the same meal equivalent as another state or another program. So another question. A lot of questions about meals per labor hour. It's one of my favorite KPIs. What if you utilize subs to cover shifts, but it's not consistent? You definitely want to use the hours that you include as you're benchmarking your meals per labor hour. So if a sub is covering for one of your staff, what I would do is you can also use a sheet on your own, a spreadsheet where you list all your employees and you can track those hours from month to month. That might give you an idea of whether or not that average is pretty standard. So there's a number of ways. It really depends on how you're going to use the data as to how you want to track that. Consistency is really the important thing, thinking about what do I want to use this data for, and then figuring out if you're including all the points that would help you reach that conclusion. Another question is the meals per labor hour based on all produced meals or consumed meals? And you'd want to include that on the number of meals that you're producing, because that's what you're measuring. How many meals are you producing per your labor hour? One last question. Is there a sample of how data is placed in the Excel spreadsheet to show its flow? So really what you can do is enter your data into that very first spreadsheet, and then you can just move along from tab to tab, and you'll see how that information flows from one spreadsheet to the other. That information is also outlined on the spreadsheet. It gives you a definition of how to use that information. That concludes my portion of the presentation. I want to thank you all for your time. I look forward to hearing great stories about everyone using their KPIs. And now I'd like to turn it back over to Teresa.
Thank you, Sandy, for that wonderful presentation on the benefits and how to use KPIs to use them for benchmarking in a food service operation. ICN has developed numerous financial management resources, and please visit the links on the screen. The ICN.org, the first one is the KPIs. The second link talks about financial management, and it's a course for school and nutrition directors. We also have a financial management course for school and nutrition managers. Just a final reminder that today's webinar has been recorded and can be viewed on the ICN website at theicn.org/star. Please complete the evaluation for this webinar. This concludes our October webinar, and remember to check out next month's for another webinar on a more exciting things going on in school and nutrition. Thanks again to our speaker, Sandy Kerwood. Have a great day.